Okay, great. Okay, well, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the walk out of Joe's Pond and now coming back here to the town library. And I'm Josh Benish. I'm Associate Director, Water Resources Institute. I've been working very closely with Hannah on organizing the whole series here. It's great to have all of you here today. The Water Resources Institute, we work to enhance the collective impact of UVM's water research across campus. We're thrilled to be back here for our second Talks and Walks on UVM's Waterside event. And today we're focusing on Joe's Pond Natural Area and also Beaver Natural History. And thank you so much to the Morrisville Centennial Library for hosting us here today. This is great. The research we highlight throughout this whole series kind of takes place across our living laboratories at UVM, sites such as our natural areas and Lake Champlain. These sites provide a canvas for translating UVM's research into education and on-the-ground stewardship. And so today it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Brendan Fisher. Brendan is the director of the environmental program and our new Field Labs Core, which supports all of our natural areas, research forests, and agricultural sites to be able to support the use of these sites for student learning and for research. His field work lies at the nexus of conservation, natural resource economics, and human behavior. He works in places like the Spanish Pyrenees and Tanzania. However, over the last few years, Brendan has become increasingly dedicated to using UVM's natural areas in our own backyard as a key place for students to translate science into stewardship. And so although his past research hasn't focused solely on beavers, beavers are a subject that he's particularly passionate about. And we asked him to specifically do a talk today about how beaver activity, like that at Joe's Pond, creates significant opportunities for students and faculty to investigate critical questions related to habitat structure, water quality, and historical ecology. So with that, please join me in welcoming Dr. Brendan Fisher.
Thanks, Josh. First, I want to start out with a bunch of thanks. Thanks to Hannah for helping set up this whole thing and get us coffee and pastries, and Josh as well for setting this up. Emily for an amazing walk this morning. Thank you so much. Ron and his wife for the donation of Joe's Pond, which is quickly becoming the jewel of our 11 natural areas properties. And then thanks everybody for showing up today. It was a beautiful day out there, and I'll try to be informative, if not, at least entertaining. Josh asked me to talk about 4 months ago. He said, you should give one of these walks and talks. And I'm sure I said, he explained to me what it was going to be about, but I definitely said yes. And I'm fortunate enough to, like, as a scientist and professor, to give lots of talks. And almost every time I am not the expert in the room. This time, for sure, I am not the expert in the room here. My talk here and my interest in beavers does not come from an expertise, but really just an awe and a love of just such a cool creature. So please, get up while I'm talking if you want, or I can pass this guy around, but I don't want to put it into your hands as you're eating. I'm hoping that you pay more attention. I will pass this around so you can, are you all right with holding a dead beaver's upper jaw? Yeah, so you can see its teeth. But so I've already been asked several times that the beaver, as far as I know, doesn't have a name. This is a beaver in the Rubenstein School's cabinet that I took and walked across campus the other day. And it was awesome because so many, like the watershed, the view shed of seeing somebody carrying a beaver is very far, like 400 yards away. People are like, what is that? I brought him to the coffee shop. And then half the students were like super interested, and the other half like moved far away from me. And then last night when I brought it home to my house to come here today, my dog was just crazy. My kids don't even bat an eye anymore. I've brought like lots of things that I've picked up off roads and out of the snow. Okay, so I'm going to try to do this. This first slide comes from something that Emily mentioned the other day, and I thought, oh my gosh, I don't know anything about this. And so this is for you, Emily. This is Castor ohioensis, this big one right here. This is the giant beaver that Emily mentioned 10,000 years ago, so at the end of the last ice age in the Pleistocene. This was the character that was roaming around North America. These things were, as their name, they were giant, somewhere between 7 and 9 feet long, 250 pounds. So a big beast. But at the same time as that, there was also our friendly beaver, Castor canadensis. At one point, there were 30 species of beaver, all related. Now we're left with 2 on Earth. But this thing died out about 10,000 years ago. And this is a nice, accurate, there are actually some changes, description of it. So you can see its tail, it's more like a muskrat tail. And its teeth, they're not curved in the same way, although it looks that way here, as our beaver. This thing was more like a muskrat in terms of it ate like soft aquatic plants, was not a tree gnawer like our castor here. So our guy's got some branches here, big fat tail. And let's see what, so I've been trying to find this quote that I read about beavers. There's been a lot of work recently, a lot of scientific work, trying to understand what North America looked like back when we had somewhere between, here's a good estimate for you, 60 and 400 million beavers in North America. Yeah, right. That's the current bound. And that bound comes from a study that was done in 1932. And so recently scientists were like, we have to get a better bound on that. There's not even any information on how that person came up with that. And that number has stood. It was like, oh, that was actually pretty good. Somewhere between 60 and, what did I say? 400 million. Yeah, beavers on the landscape. So anyway, there was this great quote that tried to describe what North America looked like when there was between 60 and 400 million beavers on the landscape. And for the last 3 days, I've been trying to find it. I can't find it. Google can't find it. Chat GPT can't find it. So it's kind of making me think I made it up in my head. I did look in the several beaver books I had, and even this morning when I was having my coffee, I'm like, I think I know where it is, but I didn't find it. But I'm going to give you something that's somewhat close to it. I think. So if you bear with me, I'm going to read 2 passages today. They're just a paragraph each. But this is a book, I don't know if anybody in here has read it, by Ben Goldfarb. It won the PEN Book Award. It's an amazing book on beavers. Fantastic writer. And then another one that came out recently is called Beaverland by Layla Phillips. This book is fantastic as well. This is a lot more about like science and kind of more scientific American type writing. This is a lot more approachable to a more lay. They're both super readable. So, but they slightly different in their background, both amazingly written. All right, so this is somewhat what the world looked like in North America when there were between 60 and 400 million Castor canadensis. Small streams everywhere were interrupted by a whopping 10.6 dams per kilometer, a dam every football field. Prolific as that sounds, researchers in Wyoming have recently found streams jammed with up to 52 dams per kilometer, or one every 20 yards. Individual ponds captured enough water to inundate more than a city block. By drowning and cutting down trees, beavers permitted sunlight to penetrate the dense forest canopies, stimulating photosynthesis and growing crops of microscopic plants that buttress aquatic food webs. You didn't see nearly as much free-flowing water in this continent. A maze of beaver ponds filled nearly every creek. Even large rivers spotted beaver-built walls in their side channels and sloughs. Rivers could move laterally into floodplains, which were just loaded with beavers. And this is the quote from the person who did all these studies. Everywhere you looked, wide lowland valleys would have been beaver, beaver, beaver everywhere. And so there's another, somewhere I'll find the quote, and maybe Josh can distribute it through the listserv, that talked about the interbreeding and just how marshy much of the North American continent was. But that kind of gets at it a little bit. Beaver everywhere. So, and this is the character that we're familiar with here in North America, the one species that's left, Castor canadensis. This is from Vermont Fish and Wildlife, great photo. So when Emily was talking today about that 18 feet, that 6 meters of peat, the answer to the question is, how long have beavers been interacting in that area? Was about 10,000 years. You can close your eyes and think of any stream in North America, any water source, there was likely beavers on it. Every football field or so, beavers everywhere. This is David Thompson. He's often considered like one of the best kind of Western geographers that ever stepped on the North American continent. And he was raised he went to a poor orphan school in the UK, in London, and then signed up to be just a worker when he was young. I don't remember how old, 15 years old, for the Hudson Bay Company. Came over to the New World and then just charted. They estimate he walked between 80 and 100,000 kilometers of North America, mapping it. Or paddled. He did a lot of paddling because he was interacting with beaver, and he has this really great quote. This is from an early writing of his. He says, "The entire northern half of the continent was in possession of two distinct races of beings, man and beaver." Somewhere in his writings, I couldn't find this one either, I remember reading when I was a kid that they came across a beaver dam that was a mile long and 40 feet from crest to where they found it. Huge. A little history on the expansion of fur trade in North America. So it was a big reason why the North America was settled, a big reason why there was war. The what we often call the French and Indian Wars, often in some places is called the Fur War, the Beaver War, the War for Beavers, etc. But we can see this in the early 1600s. The fur trade was really encapsulated right on the eastern seaboard. But as we start marching, we start extirpating all of the beaver and there's fox and wolf pelts as well. It just starts slowly moving further and further. And you can see the western expansion of the United States, and a bunch of the wars in that time period, 1750, were fought over beaver expansion. Then here's the Russian fur trade in seal and fur seals as well. This is an old plot. This is a paper from 1987. The data goes up to 1984, but lots and lots of historical work was done, unearthed by this scientist, Mark Oberard, to try to figure out how many beaver pelts were leaving the country back in these days. 200,000 beaver pelts a year were leaving out of U.S. ports in the height of it around 1700, out of North American ports, 200,000 a year. And that was between several companies, but some of them, the Hudson Bay Company was exporting somewhere, again, these numbers over their 40 years or so they have them, were about 40,000 to 180,000 beaver pelts a year coming out from one company. Here's one of the classic pictures you get if you look up the fur trade at this time. They used to pack these beaver pelts in, I think they called them packs, and they would be 80 furs. But I like that picture quite a bit. This is also used in one of our books over here. So this is all going on. David Thompson also has this quote: "Every intelligent man saw the poverty that would follow the destruction of the beaver, but there were no chiefs to control it." So as he's walking 80,000 kilometers across this continent and mapping it and working for the Hudson Bay Company and working on furs, he is seeing that, geez, these things do a lot for the landscape, and we are going to be much poorer as a society, as a globe, when they leave. Let me see if this comes. So what happens? We basically get rid of most of the beavers on this continent. And their fur was so valuable. And let's see if we can see this. This is in the 1940s. There's this fun score that goes along with this, but I didn't put the score in here. So this is a plane leaving Manitoba. in 1948, I think. He brought 20 beavers down to Patagonia. He got $650 a beaver, 20 beavers, because, so there's a reason for the diamonds, because the Patagonian government and Minister Perón wanted to instigate the fur trade in Argentina. So they brought him down to Tierra del Fuego, dumped him on an island in the 40s. It turns out two things happen when you bring beavers down to Argentina. One, they breed better. Two, it's warmer there than in Manitoba, and they don't develop the very, very thick fur. And so now it's like we've got all these worthless beavers on these islands. There are now over 200,000 beavers in southern Argentina. And I was going to show another video, but they have armed guards with automatic weapons that go out on the landscape and shoot beaver. So you can look on YouTube. I did, and it was disturbing, but absolutely devastating southern Argentina. So any conservationist, any ecologist from Argentina, they will tell you beavers are the worst. But it's because they shouldn't be there. There are no natural predators. But the diamonds were, this guy was happy to bring beavers from Canada down there. He made all this money, and he said, I'm going to come back with diamonds for my girlfriend. So he traded beaver for diamonds. That was in the 1946 or 8. The next one, this one you may have seen. Has anyone ever seen the parachuting the flying beavers? So Idaho had these nuisance beavers in the 40s, and the Fish and Wildlife Department dropped beavers out of the sky in these boxes, and the boxes would break upon landing. I think they did 75. So boxes break upon landing, and then the beavers scuttle into the highlands. So you can look this up online. There's much longer video of this. It's fantastic. So they were taking nuisance beavers out of areas where they didn't want them, bringing them up way up into the middle of nowhere to reestablish colonies. And there's a great line in here. It's like, we just drop the beavers near water and they know what to do. And I couldn't find this either, but I remember reading once that out of all of the ones they dropped, only 3 died. So that's still sad, but I think there were 75 parachutes deployed from, I don't know how many feet. Like, there you go. Good luck. So pretty good success rate. So we've got Castor canadensis, and then there's Castor fibrae over in Europe, the European beaver. Can anybody tell the difference? I don't want anybody to put themselves out there because I don't even know if either of these is either of those. Very hard, almost impossible to tell the difference. Don't know. They're very similar, super similar, with the exception of that one, ours has 40 chromosomes, and the European beaver has 48. So they can't interbreed, but they're super similar. Yep. So a few years ago, it's probably 20 years ago now, a few conservationists in the UK grabbed some beavers from Norway and just put them in some waterways in Wales and Scotland. And now there is a legal reestablishment of beavers in the UK, which left the island around, I don't quite remember the date, but around 1530. There were no more beavers in England or Scotland because they had trapped them all out, which turned the eyes towards the fur trade from North America. But now they're back, and they have friends and foes of their reestablishment. And they were taken from a stock in Norway. This is the current, the yellow is the current distribution of those two types of beavers. The red dots are just how many studies are done on these beaver populations. So you can see this is a northern hemisphere species, except for when a prime minister wants a fur trade and brings them down to Argentina. This is also about a fur trade, a fur business. But then, you don't use them, you get them out there. Beavers are pretty prolific. So in their lodge, they'll have last year's yearlings and then this year's kits, and they can have between 2 and 12 on average. They have about 4, and so a beaver lodge will have like somewhere between 6 and 8 beavers in there. And so every year after the second year, the yearlings get booted out. So right around, I think it's around this time of year, there's going to be a lot of beavers trying to find their own home. The Vermont beaver, there's a reason I put the Vermont beaver, but here in Vermont, rampant trapping. Early 1800s, there's a reference that says that's around 1809 that says beavers are pretty much gone from the landscape here, with the exception of they named Essex County and maybe Orange County. So they thought, oh, there's probably no beavers left here. The state declared them gone from Vermont in 1850. 1910, we passed laws to protect them. 1920, Fish and Wildlife brings some back from New York State. And today, the beaver population is growing and strong, and Fish and Wildlife suggests that I think it's 2.5% a year growth. Feels like it's a strong population. Yes?
Why did they decide to protect them? It wasn't an economic
No.
line.
No.
So was it ecology?
Well,
there were still a lot of farmers here.
Yeah, that's a good question. Does anybody in the room know the answer to that? Yeah. I think, that's right at the time of Gifford Pinchot and the Forestry Service, and where the kind of the amount of environmental destruction that happened on the landscape was starting to really see serious local negative consequences from soil erosion and pollution in waterways, et cetera. And I think there were some individuals, it was not for fur. It was these species just need to be back on the landscape.
So it's kind of a social.
It was conservation. It was, yeah. Yep. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I asked one of our experts from Fish and Wildlife to send me some historical documents, and hopefully I have an answer. He hasn't. Yeah. Well, we reestablished Fisher, who have a much worse reputation, in the 40s, I think, was when we first started. So I think there were enough people on the leading edge of conservation that have really pushed these things. That's what's been happening in the UK for sure with beaver, which is a much more densely populated state. Similar to the Netherlands right now, the Netherlands has 10 wolf packs, one of the most densely populated countries in the Western Hemisphere. And they have 10 wild wolf packs that had reestablished from Germany, but they're just living with it and trying to figure out how to do that in a place that has lots of human-wildlife interaction. It's mostly on the border with Germany. No, they haven't, as far as I know, they haven't been seen in any of the cities, but that's probably where the rubber will meet the road. Yes?
Is there beavers engineering skills?
Yes. Yes, they do. We're going to get to that in a second. And I think their utilitarian value is something that has really been recognized lately. And there's lots of studies, and I'll show you some on that. Today, these are estimates from last year's Fish and Wildlife pamphlet. We're trapping about 800 to 1,200 individuals a year with legal permits. I don't know I can't believe that this is the number, but this is the number that's reported right now. 45 nuisance reports a year, which seems really small given that the estimated population is 35,000. So that sounds great, but nuisance beavers get a lot of press. And so we have some students trying to work on how out of place are these nuisance reports compared to the probability of them happening. Yeah.
And the trapping is for?
It's just part of Vermont. So so for the fur, for the castor, for the meat. So I had 4 students of mine working on beavers for a couple of years, and a friend is a trapper, and he brought us stew. So during one of our lab meetings, my students all got to eat beaver stew, and everyone always asks, "How was it?" So I don't really know. I don't eat a lot of meat, and this guy is an amazing chef. So it's like, I don't know. It was amazing, but whether that was the beaver, I don't know. I really don't know. The Vermont beaver is interesting because there's a couple of references in some really old texts of early explorers and trappers saying, trying to describe the beaver, the canadensis, the North American beaver, back to Europe and explain what it's like. And it says, they're about 3 feet long, and they weigh about 30 pounds, except for the Vermont beaver, which seems to be closer to 60 pounds. So I've seen two references to that. They might be self-citing each other. We haven't been able to pick that out yet. But so there was this thing back in the 1700s that like the Vermont beaver was bigger. Now that could be like isolated genetics. That could be true. But the guy who I just mentioned who made the beaver stew, he just caught a 60-pound beaver. And he said it was just the biggest beaver he's ever seen. I told him, that's the Vermont beaver. Oh, here's a picture of the re-release of for fish in Bennington County. So I think they had 12 beavers from the Adirondacks. This guy seems a little bit smaller than my friend on the table there. So what do beavers do? So here's to your question. Beavers do tons of things. We heard this morning about them being ecosystem and ecological engineers. They increase surface and subsurface water storage. So as Emily was talking this morning, it's not only about the surface water, but it's what is happening about underneath the surface. Flood attenuation. Beavers can attenuate flood surges because they're storing so much water behind their dams, but also they're prepping the soils to be able to absorb water as well. They alter the flow of hydrology. They increase water and nutrient residence time. So as waters slow down, they can settle out nutrients and sediment. So they do a really nice job for water quality. Geomorphic heterogeneity. They delay sediment transport, which we know is good for our drinking water, is good for our irrigation water, is good for our hydroelectric systems as well. Store carbon, nutrients, sediments. Increase aquatic primary productivity, so they slow things down and they allow things to grow up in the slow called lentic waters, and they increase habitat complexity, biodiversity. This is a picture of the largest dam that we know of on Earth. This is in Alberta. It's called the Wood Buffalo Dam, and it's over half a mile long. It was seen from space by some like satellite people. They were analyzing something. I don't remember what it was, but the story, you can look it up. The story, they were looking at satellite images and all of a sudden like, what the heck is this in the middle of nowhere, Manitoba? And then they drilled down and they were like, oh, geez, this is a beaver dam. So they think it's been there for 1,000 years or so. It stores 90, I don't know, like, you tell people numbers and it's cubic meters of water. Like, who knows what that is? The best estimate I saw was 92,000 truckloads of water. So we can all imagine a truck. So 92,000 truckloads of water, but this is in Canada. So that was converted to, what do you think in Canada? Liters of electricity? More fun than that. What do you think about when you think about Canadians other than beavers and maple? Hockey. 16,000, I think. 16,000 hockey rinks. That's how much water it holds. Okay, so back to your question, what are beavers doing on the landscape, right? So this is a schematic of using what's called analog dams, beaver analogs. And so it's just scientists going and conservationists putting a bunch of stuff in the water to try to pretend like it's a beaver. And so they create these beaver analog dams, and it slows the water down, and it starts to build up some different type of vegetation on the side. It starts to collect sediment and therefore changing the curve of the stream. Then beavers find it. Oh, it's slow water. It's pretty good. We got more vegetation here. And then the beavers can come in and do their thing. And so as beavers are developing these areas, we have more vegetation and a more varied habitat. We have more varied habitat within the stream, not only outside the stream. And then you start to get to what's called a beaver complex, where you've got multiple families of beavers with multiple dams on a landscape. And you can see these in that last image I showed. You can zoom out and see all these different little pockets. You can see this from satellite images in northern Michigan as well, just like where beavers have been left to go abandoned and do their thing on the landscape. Now, if we roll back to 60 to 400 million beavers on the landscape, a lot of the US and Canada looked like this. This huge complex of water and soil and sediment trapping and the heterogeneity among the habitat. a few years ago, a friend of mine sent me a text. He's like, "Oh, this is where my hunting camp is." I said, "Oh, that's pretty cool." He had a flag on it somewhere. And I saw this, and it was when my students and I were first becoming interested in like maybe doing some beaver studies. And can anyone see the beaver complex here? Yeah. So we've got this string of beaver dams. So you've got a stream coming this way, and then the beavers are, blocking it up and then slowly moving. But then you can see a much older system here as well. And so again, this is in a state where we basically trapped out all our beavers by early 1800s. Now there's only 35,000. They suggest that we may have had tenfold more than that here at the time when the trappers started going abandoned. And so you would have seen landscape like this all over Vermont. So back to what do beavers do? Not only are they changing the hydrology and sediment and attenuating floods, they're an ecosystem of itself. This is from, I forget the name of the organization, and that's Green Matters, I think, showing how important beavers are. And so this is just a conceptual diagram of how there are these keystone species. So they change the macroinvertebrates in the water. That affects those are dragonflies. That affects the dragonflies, which then affects the amphibians and the bird life and the fish life and the fish-eating mammals out on the land. They've got the ferrets. I don't know what that thing is there. You got mink. You got maybe a fisher, or it might be a mix between a fisher and a warthog. I don't know. You got a muskrat. Okay, so you get the picture. There are these keystone species. Lots of work recently on beavers as firefighters. So this is in Idaho. I forget, the Sharp Fire, I think, came through a few years ago. And you've got these creeks coming through, and then you have creeks with with active beaver dams and complexes on it. And Hannah told me not to show a lot of graphs. But this one was so cool. Okay. These blue lines here are where beaver dams are along the stretch of a river. So the x-axis here is a stretch of a river. The y-axis is the vegetation along that river. Okay, so you can see the green, and maybe from the back of the room, you can see the green, Christina, Sarah? Yeah, okay. So lots more vegetation along the stretch of the river where the beaver dams are. That makes sense. We just talked about how much they do. Before the fire, if you can see the gray bars, was the vegetation along the stream before the fire. So roughly the whole stretch of the river had the same type of vegetation around it. Fire comes through, and only the areas where beavers have active complexes is there still vegetation. And years later, we still see that. So they're creating these wet areas, these fire breaks. I think I have a picture next. Yeah, this I think is the Sharp Fire. So this was from a really cool article in Nat Geo. Beaver dammed wetland in Ball Creek, Idaho, so-called the Emerald Refuge, that can serve as a fire break. So not only is it a refuge for wildlife during the fire, but in some cases there's been suggestions that these are the things that stopped fires from moving across the landscape. Yes?
So I'm a little confused because beavers cut things down and they eat things that are trees. And
Yeah.
when you see, like, for example, we go to Raven Ridge.
Yeah, lovely.
And there was beaver activity, and then there was nothing, and now they're back again.
Yeah.
There's a beaver lodge there.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So how is that?
How is that good?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How can it be that they are, predators of the tree species, and nothing is left but pines? So doesn't that kind of isolate?
Yeah, they're a real oxymoron, these beavers, for sure. So
it seems like, and the other question is, once this was sort of in my head before, but once they sort of cleared out an area of what they wanted, so then they come back when those things start to come back again.
Yep, exactly. So why do beavers build dams?
So they make houses.
Ron, what do you got?
Well, first of all, the streams that are in navigation moving their food. But the other reason is when they build their
Jeez, Ron, you gotta get up here and give this talk. Exactly. So it's a really nice way to navigate your food around a forested and oftentimes hilly landscape by just floating it. It's what we did with our logging industry. And wolves don't like to swim. Coyotes don't like to swim. Foxes aren't swimming. Bears aren't swimming after a beaver. And so they make their own safe area. But after a while, as you just mentioned, they eat all the food that they really like in that area. So what do? They move upstream. And then they do it again. Fortunate for them, so there's two things, I guess. Fortunate for them is that their preferred food are these deciduous trees, like the cambrium and the deciduous trees that grow quickly, that don't mind wet, like these alder and willows. And so they'll sprout back up in a few years, somewhere between 2 and 6 years. So they move upstream, just like we're seeing here, moving upstream. So you can see like the little thumbprint around the blue mark. That's where they've taken almost everything down, changed the ecosystem. But now they're moving upstream and they're going to find more food and they're just going to keep moving. But I don't know how long, 20 years later, it looks different. Just like Emily was talking today, now this water over here is filled in. And so that ecosystem's coming back. And that's how they do it. And so it's definitely a thing of time and space. So beavers, they do ruin the environment in a local area for a little time, but they're also creating that environment as they do it, and they're changing it. So in ecology, the number one rule is, what's the number one rule in ecology? The only constant is change. So that's what beavers are doing on the landscape. Yeah. So they're fighting fires. Here's a little study that I find interesting. This is trying to understand the economics of beavers, how they behave on the landscape now, and what they provide us. And so this study was a pretty well done study looking at the amount of habitat and biodiversity biodiversity provision they provide, how much greenhouse gases they're storing, how many recreation, so people going out to beaver ponds to bird, to butterfly, to dragonfly. So these beaver ponds are really great places to see all of that. But people also go out and spend money to see beavers. Moderation of extreme events. So beaver dams, here's another part of this oxymoron. Beaver dams can attenuate floods, and a beaver complex can attenuate a flood. But a beaver dam that breaks can cause a flood. So there's pluses and minuses on this. So if you're downstream from a really big beaver dam, you probably don't want that beaver dam to be there, and you got to think about ways to get around that. But so there's moderation of extreme events, but they also cause floods. So there's cost and benefits there. They purify these waters by, again, slowing the sediment down, collecting things behind the dam. Anyway, these folks, according to their assessment, an area the size of Vermont with a healthy beaver population would be delivering about $600 million worth of services a year. So, $600 million. There's a line in this book where people are building constructed wetlands for Chesapeake Bay to try to keep nutrients out of the Chesapeake. And these tiny little ponds that they're building are $1 million. And the person who builds them became a beaver believer, as they're called. And these beavers started doing the same work he would cost for $1 million in 1 year. So the same size ponds, beavers are building six beavers from the lodge are coming out and doing $1 million worth of work. So $600 million in an area the size of Vermont per year isn't that crazy to think about. But you don't even have to read the title of this. I only put this up here because this paper has 360 references. It is so in-depth on all the reviews of things that beavers do on the landscape. It is so long. Like a normal journal paper will be about 3,500 words. So about maybe 4 pages. This thing, 48 pages, 360 references. And the answer is that beavers do a lot of great on the environment, but they also do bad things too. So there are places where they're destroying too many trees and it's causing problems with the geochemistry. There's some evidence that beaver dams, they will take water off of industrial areas. So we've got beavers in Centennial Woods in Burlington, and it's draining the South Burlington parking lots, et cetera. And that beaver dam is slowing sediment down and storing, unfortunately, heavy metals and probably mercury over time. Beaver dams after a while might be re-releasing more mercury into the atmosphere than it's settling. So we don't know. So there's pluses and minuses. Beavers, it's not all 100% great. Like I said, if you live downstream from a big beaver dam, you might not want it there. But the balance of evidence suggests that having more beavers on the landscape is really good for us. A few years ago, as I mentioned to start the talk, I am not a beaver expert, but I am in awe of them, and they're just so cool, and I love them. And I'm going to try not to give this beaver back for a while because I like walking around campus with it. So a few years ago, I had four students. They came to my colleague Mariano Rodriguez Cabal and I, and they said, we want to do some research. So they were juniors at the University of Vermont. He said, our classes aren't giving us enough research. Can we be involved in any of your projects? I said, maybe, but wouldn't it be cool if we all learned about a project together? And they said, yeah, that'd be great. I said, let's think about that. So we had our first meeting and we thought about all these ideas, but the whole time I just wanted to do beavers. So I was like slowly planting these beaver ideas. And in the end, we wound up doing beavers, and we read books and we read as many papers as we could. And so I had these four amazing young women doing work. We had so much fun. We learned so much, and it forced me to think about redesigning my class. I teach a class called Research Methods, so it's teaching juniors in the Rubenstein School for the Environment I have two of my students from last year here. They were the guinea pigs. So I said, I'm going to redo this whole class. And instead of research methods, we're still going to learn research methods, but it's all going to be about beavers. Like, we're going to learn research through beavers. And I won't point to you two, but when I got the evaluations last December about how this class went, in the scientific world, we'd call my grades, my scores bimodal. We had half the students were like, this is great. I learned so much. It was so fun. The other half were something like, I hate beavers. Or I don't ever want to read another thing about beavers. But what was pretty cool, I think, was that we learned how to do historical content analysis through looking at old reports around beavers. We learned about observational studies. So how do you go out into nature and try to understand pattern and process through observing things and collecting data and trying to relate that data in a causal way. We learned about creating surveys. We did a survey to see how people felt about beavers and if their feelings, their emotions towards beavers changed, if they had positive or negative interactions with them. Those three. We learned about experiments. And so we didn't do an experiment with beavers because that would have taken a lot more paperwork. But there are experiments out there that, most living things have a salt drive. Our cells and muscles require salt to operate and function properly. And so there's these scientists that went out there and they painted alders and pines and all kinds of things with salt to see if the beavers preferentially selected for a saltier tree. So we learned about experiments. They do not prefer salt. Beavers get plenty of salt through other things. This was one of my favorites that one of the students did their final project on, and they looked at the Burlington Free Press from 1865. So from 1865 till 2020, about how many times beavers were mentioned. And you can see that the number of mentions in a decade was about 100 back in the I guess it went back before that, 1848. And then it's silent for 50 years. There's no mentions of beavers why is that? There's no beavers. Then it starts to kick up a little bit. And then now, more recently, lots more mentions of beavers because there's a lot more beavers. And we're having a lot more human-wildlife interactions with those beavers. And then what they did was they looked at all these articles and tried to code why people are talking about beavers. And this isn't the best way to display this information, but she still got an A. The yellow bars are the recent mentions the purple bars, the recent mentions of beavers. And so names here, most of the mentions were names. So Beaver Street or Main Street I don't know what else. Beaver Street's the only thing. Beaver Meadows Development or Beaver, some kind of name. Classified, so there were things classified selling things about beavers, and then property. So a lot of the mentions were about beavers' interactions with personal property. So these are our nuisance beavers. Shelburne's got to do something about those beavers on Shelburne Road. But one of the things, the blue bars are from the early days. And when those are mentioned in the Burlington Free Press, it's about fur. It's about, that's not that good. It's about fur, mainly. These are place names again. So there's lots of things called beavers. After we killed them all, we named things after them. There was one other thing I wanted to point out. Fur, property, place, ecological. So at the time we're starting to, this is a little bit to your question, we're reestablishing beavers here. The Burlington Free Press is producing articles that talk about the ecological role of beavers. And so that starts to kick up in the 1930s. So cool little project. Think it was fun. Think it worked. No comment there. But these are the kind of things that we pulled out of this study. So we also looked at printed material that our UVM library collects. Back to 1691 was our first instance of beaver being mentioned. And unfortunately, it was the name of a ship. But we can see this one's from 1832, elegant hats. It mentions the beaver. So the students are taking these and trying to figure out what are the values associated with this beaver. Here, it's about fur. It's about a utilitarian value. And then all the way up here in 2020, it's like, beavers, they're such a pain in the butt. And so our values for these beavers changed along with their populations over time. Also, beavers as educational materials. These are two of my students, and this is a dam that popped up overnight almost in Centennial Woods, probably our most visited natural area. We probably have up to 20,000 visitors. I've got some new data for you, Josh. You're going to be excited. A year in Centennial Woods, 80 acres in the center of Burlington, and then beavers just started flooding out one of our main paths and bridges. And I got all kinds of emails from people like, you got to deal with these beavers. My dog doesn't like them. Like all kinds of stuff. But I swear, and maybe this is confirmation bias, but that next spring, there were dragonflies everywhere. And there were more birds eating the dragonflies. And it was like a buzzing ecosystem where just before it was this tiny little creek. But we had to try to do something because they were going to flood our bridge and we didn't have money to replace the bridge. And so we were creating something called a beaver deceiver. So you dig the dam up, you put this thing in, you run water through underneath the bridge or underneath the dam. And so it drains the water. The beavers can keep it up to a certain level, but it's not going to overflow if you get the flow rate right. You cage it up so they can't plug this hole. You put the tube down far enough downstream so they don't hear it. Beavers hate the sound of running water. And then voila. This one lasted about 5 days before they figured it out and blocked it up. So I closed the path. And then beaver complexes laboratories. This is just to show how much work these students did. This is them in the creek. They went to 14 different dams last summer in Vermont. The summer before last, and collected water samples. So they're testing how the beaver dams clean water. So how much sediment is above stream versus below stream. They collected, you can't see this, these are lots of little bugs, these macroinvertebrates, what the community of bugs, water bugs, look like upstream versus downstream. These are also nymphs for things like dragonflies. They're also clams and things that need calcium to survive, et cetera. So they're doing all kinds of water quality things. And then they're creating these graphs to see if there's a difference between upstream and downstream. So they learn stats through this project. They learn how to code in R, which is a statistical program. They learned how to identify macroinvertebrates. Then they taught me, because I didn't know any of this stuff. And they presented these findings at a conference. So it was super fun, and beavers were so easy to use as a tool to teach lots and lots of things. Final thing I'll say is we got beavers in 5 of our 11 natural areas. So Karst Wetland, that whole valley is pretty much, remember what I said in the beginning, if there's water in history, beavers were there. But this whole valley in Heinsberg has a huge beaver thumbprint on it, and they're still active there. I just showed you the ones in Centennial Woods. A big snowstorm and ice storm about 5 years ago blew that dam out. So the dam only lasted 2 years. The path was only flooded for 2 years. It totally changed the ecosystem. Dam blows out. They move upstream, and now they've been upstream for the last couple of years. They're slowly moving back down. So this is to your questions, like, oh, there's food down here again. We did have to spend a lot of time caging off these huge hemlocks. They don't love to eat hemlock, but they like to chew on things, like my dog. And so, like, we have to cage off these huge trees so they don't just take them down willy-nilly. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Colchester Bog, we got beavers in there. We go in there to cage black gum trees. We're at the northernmost extent of this tree in North America, and we have a few of them here in Colchester Bog, and the beavers have been like chewing on them. And so, like, we're going out there tromping through the bog and protecting them from the beavers because they're really important species. You saw the evidence of beavers at Joe's Pond. I do have some videos, but I don't think I have time. But so, like, this was the camera trap. This was right along the trail you were walking on, right? Emily, this is right. Our first night of camera trapping in Joe's Pond, we have this really great pictures of coyotes scenting and rubbing against this tree. And about, I don't know, 4 hours later, a fisher comes by, and there's otters too. Otters, but within the same 6 hours, we had the coyotes and the fisher, and then later that night, some raccoons came by. So this was a nice smelly tree. Shelburne Pond, lots of beavers around Shelburne Pond as well. This is how we dealt with them. You might not be able to see, but when people were sending me mail to say, like, get rid of the beavers, we put these signs up and said this trail is not maintained. Ecosystem services provided by beavers include water regulation, habitat and biodiversity provision, nutrient cycling, greenhouse gas sequestration, waste assimilation, and then non-consumptive recreation. I'm going to read you one more thing, and that's it. So that's like a crazy road trip along Beaverland. But once again, the people who write about beavers have done such a good job. So I want to read this to you real quick. There is a growing coalition of wildlife biologists and land managers and renegade ranchers who are protecting and restoring beavers for every reason under the sun. To create butterfly habitat, to nourish cattle, to purify drinking water, to rebuild eroded river valleys. And the adherents of this movement have a name. They call themselves Beaver Believers. And he goes on to say, there is no single trait that unites a beaver believer, besides, of course, the unshakable conviction that our salvation lies in a rodent. In an era when most environmental actions spawn polarized outrage, beaver believers span party lines. You'll meet plenty in the dyed-in-the-wool beaver huggers, but you'll also encounter red state stockmen. Many devotees are trained biologists. Many, I've noticed, are not. The world's most knowledgeable beaver believers include former hairdressers, physician's assistants, chemists, and child psychologists. Then there was something else that was going on. And then he says, this book is about the mightiest theme I know, how we can learn to coexist and thrive alongside our fellow travelers on the planet. Beavers are an amazing analog for life, for science, for learning, and for our interaction with the environment. And I hope you all feel the same way. So thank you so much.
So we do have some time for questions.
Yeah, whether or not I can answer them, I don't know.
So we'll go ahead and take a few questions. Go ahead, Ron.
Yeah.
Question.
Thanks, Ron.
So, have people embraced the idea that beavers are going to help with flood mitigation, or because of our difficulties and tragedies in Vermont, or are people seeing beavers as a connection being made that is one that's politically viable?
Yeah, I mean, I think that answer is spatially varied. There are places where people are beaver believers and places where they're not. Even within yourself, you might be a beaver believer until they're about to flood your backyard. So I think so. I mean, the number of research articles that we've seen over the last decade on how important they are for the landscape and also for human services, like services provided to humans, are just keep going up and up and up. A lot of restoration ecology. This is the decade of restoration for the UN Environment Program. Beavers are built right into those programs for restoration. So I do see this as on the upturn for sure.
Because the ranchers that started talking about this,
Yeah.
they seem to be really have bought into it because they see the value of it, and it sort of woke everybody up.
That's right. Yeah. So if you have no water and you're drying out and you're a rancher, you're not a rancher for much longer. And beavers are cheap.
Right.
Yeah.
In relation to this, I heard a talk by Lyle,
Skip Lyle.
Mm-hmm. The beaver deceiver.
Yep. Guru.
Builder. I mean, yes. And so he said, and he may have a particular perspective because he sells these for like $1,000 or something, or $4,000, depending on the circumstances. But he said mostly in Vermont and New Hampshire, if somebody's thing is flooded, they got the beavers. That's still ongoing. They're much less likely to either know about this work or be willing to spend money to protect their property.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And he's worked on it so much that they last longer than 5 years.
Yeah,
I asked
for
him
sure.
how long the longest that he's ever had in
Yep.
place. He said 20 years.
Yeah. Yeah. He features quite a bit in I forget which one of these two books. But yeah, I mean, this is one of the things where like the balance of evidence we really need to think about. So if the numbers are right, we're trapping 1,000 a year roughly, and we're getting 45 nuisance reports, and there's 35,000 beavers on the landscape. So we need to be really careful in thinking about like how much press is the bad stuff they're doing getting compared to them just being on the landscape. We love bad stuff in the press. And so like, look at these, they look cute and harmless, but they're evil. And so we really need to think about if those numbers are right, 1,045 and 35,000, we're probably heading in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, the cultural ideas like about wolves.
Yeah.
That they're sort of the devil
Yep.
or something, there's like these things that are very old and part of the habit of people's neighborhood.
Yeah.
Think about things. I think that's probably the one that's hardest.
Yeah, and there's really good research on human-wildlife conflict and stakeholders' views on this. And I'm kind of ad-libbing here, but you can think of distributions of people, right? So there's going to be a side that everything beavers do is amazing. They're the best. And then there's going to be a side that's never jumping on board with beavers. That's what we see with wolves as well. We see it with catamounts. But then there's this big group of people in the middle who are like, can be moved one way or another, or don't know what their preferences are. And so that's where I see this hope is like, the more evidence we provide, it's really clear how much good they're doing. And, they have a right to be on the landscape too.
We have time for one more question.
Quick comment and another quick question. At MIT, the sports teams' mascots are called
The beavers.
beavers.
Yep.
And do they hibernate?
They're not true hibernators, but they do spend a lot of their winter in their lodge. But they'll store their food underwater all winter. So they get stuff off the landscape. They weight it down sometimes with rocks, bring it underwater, wait till it's waterlogged, and then therefore, like when they're hungry in the lodge, they'll slip out, and they don't even have to get air. They just slip out. They can be underwater for like 15 minutes. Grab one of their sticks, bring it into their lodge, but not true hibernators.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Brendan. This is fantastic.
Thanks. Come see this thing. It's amazing.